Good morning. My name is John Gehring, president of Bethel College. Welcome to campus and to the Mennonites and the Holocaust Conference. We are proud to be organizers and hosts for this conference. I hope sometime during the day, in the next couple of days, you take time to walk around between sessions and enjoy the beautiful campus. I want to provide a brief orientation to some of the significant landmarks on campus. As you walk out the front door of the Lichen Fine Arts Center, you will step immediately onto the sidewalk that encircles a round, grassy area known as the Green. The Green is the social center for college life, sometimes hosting a game of Frisbee, sometimes containing hammocks strewn between the trees, and sometimes food tents and vendors during our annual Fall Fest celebration in October. In December, students encircle it and pass a flame around by lighting candles in an important spiritual and seasonal event known as the Lighting of the Green. One past president described the Green as connecting center and spirit of the campus. Immediately to your right and on the south side of the Green is a monument to the Chisholm Trail. It describes the brief period of time from 1867 to 1871 when cattle were driven northward from Texas to markets in Abilene, Kansas, and the surrounding areas. The raucous nature of the cattle drives eventually gave way to the arrival of the Mennonites, accompanied by turkey red wheat, plows, and an industrious and peaceful disposition. Across the Green are two significant buildings. Gleaming in the sunshine is the historic limestone administration building, the cornerstone of which was laid in 1888. It was Bethel's first, and for a while, its only building. The Castle of the Prairie is positioned on a gentle rise, affectionately known as Mount Hebron. Today is on the National Register of Historic Places and the symbolic building in the sense that every single one of Bethel College's 15,000 alumni have in common to their Bethel experience. To the west, your left as you stand outside the entrance, is the Mons Library, home to the Mennonite Library and Archives, or MLA for short. With its 50,000 book and periodical volumes, 6,600 cubic feet of archival records, and 1.2 terabytes of electronic records, the MLA is a treasure for those among us who seek to understand the Anabaptist tradition, the Mennonite Church, and its significant historical figures such as H.R. Voth, E.G. Kaufman, and Robert Kreider. The MLA is supported by private donations. We are over halfway to our goal of establishing over $1 million for that endowment. Your interest in Mennonite history, as evidenced by your presence here today, suggests a role for you in building the endowment of the MLA. On the topic of donors, I want to recognize the sponsors who made this conference possible through their generous donations. The lead sponsor is the Marpeck Fund. The Marpeck Fund was established in 1993 by Robert and Gerald Kreider of North Newton in honor of their parents. The fund supports interinstitutional cooperation and conversation regarding topics of Anabaptist significance. The Franzen Family Foundation is named for Werner Franzen, a native of Ontario, a graduate of Bethel College, a surgeon, and a lifelong student of Mennonite and Anabaptist history. Other sponsors include Mennonite Church USA through the Showalter Foundation, Heston College, Bethel College, the Mennonite Library and Archives, and Mennonite Polish Studies Association. Please join me in thanking the sponsors for the conference. This conference is also made possible through the hard work of the organizers. Mark Jansen, professor of history at Bethel College, John Sharp, Professor of Bible and Religion at Heston College, and John Thiessen, Curator of the Mennonite Library and Archives at Bethel College, are the visionary forces that have brought us together today. Mark, John, and John, please stand and be recognized and thanked by your colleagues. It is appropriate that this conference be held on the campus of Bethel College. Bethel is the oldest Mennonite-affiliated college in the United States. It is what I refer to as the archetype of Mennonite higher education. And being the archetype means that we have the continual responsibility of shaping the future, of looking forward. And I wonder today what that future looks like. To my mind, that future must start with the truthful reckoning of the role of Mennonites in the Holocaust, including their roles as sympathizers, perpetrators, and facilitators of the haunting events that took place in Europe in the 1930s and 1940s. The future must flow through the guidance so carefully expressed by Elie Wiesel. For the dead and the living, we must bear witness. The future should recognize the reality articulated at the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. The Holocaust did not begin with killing. It began with words. And the future should have as its ideal the end point of a phrase on a magnet that I have on my refrigerator from the National Holocaust Museum. Never again. With those simple words, I want to welcome you again to this conference and to the campus of Bethel College. Enjoy your time here. Thank you.
Thank you, President Gehring. Before I go on to a more focused introduction to the conference, I'll start with a few announcements. First of all, one is that I'm aware that there have been some flyers that were being passed out for a gathering. I want to make clear that that's not approved, that's actually disapproved by our organizers and our conference here, and we're not we want to condemn Holocaust denial, not stand by while it's going on. So now, some more pleasant or informative announcements. Our keynote presentation this morning has been moved over to Memorial Hall because because of the likely large attendance. There will be plenty of people around here who can show you the way to get across to Mem Hall when we're ready to go over there. Another item, we have a book table, as you've probably noticed, out in the lobby run by our local Faith and Life bookstore. And so we encourage you to take a look at what things are available there, a wide variety of Mennonite history-related items. Next, a couple of our presenters that were originally on the program are not able to be here. Peter Letkeman was not able to attend, so that session will be one presentation shorter, which might allow us a little bit of time to catch up on our schedule if that's needed. And Astrid von Schlachter was also not able to be here, and her paper will be read, I guess, by me in that session. John Wire, who is going to be moderating the last session, was also not able to be here, and John Sharp will be in charge of that session Saturday afternoon. Another item, the Kaufman Museum across the highway to the west from the campus has put together a mini exhibit related to the conference, which you would be encouraged to go take a look at. You should have gotten a museum pass in your packet to go over and see that mini pop-up exhibit related to the conference, as well as the permanent exhibit of Land and People, focusing on Mennonites and other inhabitants of the Plains States, and also the current temporary exhibit, the Chisholm Trail Driving the American West, which again would inform you about the pre-Mennonite stories of this piece of territory that we inhabit. And one last note about procedure for question and answer sessions that are part of follow each set of presentations here. Because of the large number of people, we're wanting to have each person who asks a question or makes a comment to limit themselves to 1 minute and to wait to offer an additional question or comment until all others who are waiting have had their chance to weigh in. Hopefully that will facilitate getting as many people as possible to offer their comments and questions. So, welcome formally to our conference on the history of Mennonites and the Holocaust. I'm planning to give you some background on how this conference came to be, and if there's time, some comments on the topic more generally. But I thought I could start with a detail. Probably many people have wondered who the person is on our poster, or maybe you haven't, but you should have. His name is Johannes Esau, or Esau, as that name is anglicized around here. Was born September 14, 1904 in Ellerwald in West Prussia. We know almost nothing about his life or fate. His mother was an Andrus, so he had fairly close relatives here in central Kansas, and members of his family corresponded with relatives and acquaintances in North America, both US and Canada, and that's how we ended up with his photo. So the hapless Johannes Esau, with his nice brown shirt uniform and his nice swastika armband, ended up as a representative Nazi Mennonite on a poster more than a century after his birth. So maybe that will cause some of you to go out and shred all of your photos or something. The impetus for this conference originally came from Mennonite Church USA. In September 2016, Andre Gingrich Stoner, Director of Interchurch Relations, suggested that Mennonite Church USA was interested in supporting 3 conferences, one on the Mennonites and the Holocaust, one on reading the Bible after the Holocaust, which was proposed to be at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana, and one on Jewish and Mennonite experiences of trauma, which was talked about as possibly being at the Center for Justice and Peace Building at Eastern Mennonite University. And as far as I know, the other 2 conferences haven't taken place. We decided to accept the offer about the Mennonites and the Holocaust conference and started planning the meeting that we are now attending. This conference also takes place in the context of 2 others of relatively recent years, one in Germany in September 2015, which I attended, which resulted in a book publication that came out last year. And then there was one in Paraguay that took place on March 11, 2017. And that choice of date seemed a little bit mean-spirited to me. If you don't know why, you can ask someone else here who knows the Paraguay story to explain that. And I think we have a number of people here in attendance who attended one or both of those other events. I'd like to think that I began the current generation of English language historiography on Mennonites and Nazism with my 1999 book, Mennonite and Nazi, and my 1994 article on U.S. Mennonites and Nazism. And from that perspective, I thought I could offer or justify offering a few thoughts about how that historiography has proceeded, not so much about the details of what has been discovered and what questions have been asked, but more about meta-historical issues, what unexamined assumptions have been in the background as this work has gone on. First of all, I've asked myself, and maybe we should all ask, what the point is of looking at Mennonites and Nazism. Why should anyone care beyond idle curiosity? Sensationalism would be one motive, You know, two things that attract attention on TV are sex and Nazis. So we've picked one of those two, and that's why we have such a big audience. And as a Mennonite, and that's a little phrase that should be open to question. I'll get back to that in a little bit. As a Mennonite, what interests me is whether there was any particular connection between Mennonites and Nazism. Were Mennonites more accepting of Nazism than the average person of the time, or more resistant, or pretty much the same as average? If there is some particular connection one way or the other, then why is that? And underlying that, of course, is the worry about whether something like that can be prevented in the future. The fact that most U.S. Mennonites voted for Trump would seem to say that it can't be prevented. But it seems to me this is very much an insider Mennonite way of looking at all of this. For persons outside of Mennonite circles, it would seem that the most likely justification for looking at Mennonites and Nazism is as a micro-historical case study. Mennonites are a smallish subpopulation available for reasonably convenient study, and if they responded to Nazism in pretty much the same way as their non-Mennonite contemporaries, then maybe that simply serves to confirm or reinforce patterns that are seen in the historiography elsewhere. Mennonites often write history in what I've labeled a Mennocentric way. That's a word I started using back in my book on Latin America to describe how Paraguayan Mennonites have looked back on their story of the 1930s and 40s. Some Mennonites want to believe in Mennonite exceptionalism. They want Mennonites to be either unusually good or unusually bad, or at least maybe unusually influential. But Mennonites are insignificant and invisible in the broader history of Nazism. They aren't mentioned in Mein Kampf or in any of Hitler's public speeches. They don't appear in the indexes of recent Heinrich Himmler biographies, Himmler being responsible for a lot of the operational activity of the Holocaust and for a lot of the policies in the occupied Soviet Union during the war. They aren't even mentioned in the indexes of recent books about the occupation of the Soviet Union, such as Wendy Lower's Nazi Empire building and the Holocaust in Ukraine. Some Mennonite writers, and Horst Gerlach comes to mind here, but there are a number of others, some Mennonite writers have wanted to boast about or sometimes condemn occasional Mennonite encounters with Nazi leaders, but history does not revolve around Mennonites. My own hypothesis would be that Mennonites are about as good or bad as everybody else. I think there is Mennonite particularity, but not Mennonite exceptionalism. The Mennonite interaction with Nazism is a particular story that isn't the same as anybody else's, and therefore is of some interest for that reason. But it shouldn't carry the baggage that Mennonites are exceptionally good or exceptionally bad or exceptionally significant. I don't see any evidence that supports an interpretation of Mennonite exceptionalism. Now, I keep throwing around this category Mennonite, and we can't help but doing so in the context of this conference. But that's something that I think is a major failure in the investigation of Mennonites and Nazism, and also in many other areas of Mennonite historiography. People seem to be very resistant to asking the question, who counts as a Mennonite? The default implicit knee-jerk answer has been to accept the same definition that the Nazis used. A Mennonite is a person whose grandparents were Mennonite, usually with a Mennonite name. One example of this is Gerhard Rempel. He has discussed the war criminal Jack Reimer in a couple of different articles, which many of you have probably read. Rempel simply asserts that Reimer was a Mennonite without explanation, and this seems like sort of a bait-and-switch tactic. It primes the reader subconsciously with an image of 21st century North American socially progressive Mennonites, or else an image of 19th century North American Mennonite nonconformity to the world, and then this mental priming is switched to a Soviet youth who was born after the 1917 revolution and would have had no experience of a regular Mennonite community or church life, and to the extent that he identified himself as a Mennonite, would have had a very different conception of what that meant. And on the other hand, the category Mennonite can't simply be defined on the basis of church membership or theological opinions. You could look at Walter/Jakob Quiring, for example. Here's someone who explicitly renounced his Mennonite religious belief, and he may never actually have been a church member. During the Nazi era, he listed himself as Gottgläubig, which was a term used in the Nazi era, particularly by party members, to explicitly repudiate a connection with the established churches, and it's something that might loosely be translated as theistic. But Quiring interacted constantly with the broader Mennonite community throughout most of his life, including during the Nazi era, and then later being longtime editor of Der Bote newspaper in Canada. So to exclude him from the category Mennonite based on his explicit religious affiliation would seem to me to be ridiculous. The writer Hans Harder is another less extreme but similar example, someone who at least in the 1930s rejected his Mennonite affiliation but continued to interact constantly with Mennonites. The figure of Hayo Schrader is another more extreme example, whom some of you might be familiar with. Or there's the more obscure case of an Epp family in the Danzig region, members of a Mennonite congregation, but rarely actually participating in congregational activities. And some of the family members were ardent Nazi functionaries, and one of them was actually imprisoned at the Stutthof concentration camp for leftist activities. So another example of marginal Mennonites, maybe. It seems to me like the problem is that historians and others want binaries, or they want mathematical set theory. They want a precise definition that tells us definitively that a particular person or group is in or out. You might remember that Harold S. Bender tried to do that with Anabaptists, and that didn't really work. It's just unworkable. That's not how that's not how linguistic categories work. Labels like Mennonite or Anabaptist are more like descriptors tall or cold. Is a particular person tall? Well, compared to whom or what? Is it cold outside? That depends on whether you ask a Manitoban or a Texan. Are Jack Reimer or Walter Quiring or the Epp family or the perennials we hear about in the archives, John Denver or Dwight Eisenhower, are these people Mennonites? The answer is not a simple yes or no. It's more like, well, sort of, or only a little, or not really, or in some ways, but not other ways. So let me skip ahead here. There isn't really time to expand on this further. There was a very interesting dissertation recently written by John Eicher that touches on some of these issues, which if you have the chance and are interested in following up, that would be something worthwhile reading, about how the linguistic category of Mennonite is expanded to include people who may not want to be included. And again, H.S. Bender is an example of that. But there isn't really time to expand on this further. My two grievances with historiography could be summarized as: one, Mennonites aren't all that important and should lay off the self-aggrandizement. And two, more important, who counts as a Mennonite, or maybe better, how Mennonite are they, or what kind of Mennonite are they? Or maybe even, whose Mennonite are they? Are they ours to claim for that category? And with that, let's plunge directly into our first session. Michelle Hirschberger from Heston College is the moderator for our first session, and will introduce the presenters.